Today I'm making a stuffed acorn squash that you can make your way.
That sounds wonderful. But first, welcome. You're watching Strickland's and Friends, a seasonal whole food plant-based cookbook. Please leave a comment. That makes us feel more like a community. If we're at our best, that's what we'll be.
There's several different options here, and I'm going to show you a lot of those options. So, acorn squash. When you look at all the different hard winter squashes, and this is an example of an acorn squash, this is also an example of an acorn squash. So they're a little bit different in size, you can see, but they're, roughly similar when it comes to having that acorn shape to them. Here's another one, a little bit smaller. So they all seem to have these little pointy ends, but acorn squash are, if you were to compare all of the hard winter squashes, probably acorn squash would win as far as nutritional value. So another option for this recipe is the delicata squash, which looks like a little yellow submarine. And it's really tasty. And with delicata squash, you can actually eat the peel very easily because it is a more delicate peel. So it roasts up nicely and you can eat the outside of it too. Some people eat the outside of acorn squash. That's fine too. Whichever kind you decide to use, make sure you wash your squash really well on the outside, that you have scrubbed it before you cut through with a knife, because that knife is going to be touching the outside. So if it was at the grocery store and a bunch of people were handling it and then you come and cut, then you're basically bringing germs and things into the squash. So go ahead and wash it really well. And then you could cut it this way around the equator, or you could cut it from North Pole to South Pole, however you want to do it, whichever is easier for you. But you do want it to be able to sit flat once you've cut it open. So you're going to cut it in half, scoop all of the seeds out, and you could throw them away, or you could save them, rinse all the stringy bits off, and then roast them for a really nice snack. So I have already cut a couple of them in half and roasted them. So you're going to roast them at 400 degrees for about 40 minutes or so. And when they come out, they're going to look like this. So I've cut the little pointy ends. So if you look at that acorn squash, it has a little pointy end. You'll want to just cut that off. So when it flips over, it sits level. Okay, so we'll get back to that in just a second. And acorn squash are really, really good for you because they have an awful lot of, it's basically beta-carotene and alpha-carotene that convert to vitamin A. They also contain magnesium and folate. They're just really, really good for you. And of course, lots and lots of fiber. So I was talking about fiber at Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine. So we definitely like those fiber-containing foods. The other things you're going to need for this recipe are any grain you like. So this is where you can play with this recipe and make it your own. So whatever kind of grain you like, that's what you want to use. So options could include wild rice. That's a good option. Maybe farro, some Italian farro. Freekeh, you could use freekeh. You could use brown rice. You could use a wild rice blend. So that's an option. You could, if you don't want to cook the grain yourself, here's another thing you can do. Go to a grocery store, look in the freezer section, and many grocery stores have already cooked brown rice available. So all you have to do is just heat up a couple of cups of it. So you're going to need 2 cups of any cooked grain, your favorite grain. Pick one. And I've played with this a few times. So the first time I made it, I did the wild rice blend. And today what I'm doing is the farro. So I really like farro. It's a very nice grain, but it has very different mouthfeel than the wild rice blend. So this is 2 cups of cooked farro that I made in my Instant Pot. Like I said, you can buy frozen. That's fine. You can buy it already cooked. It's okay. Just as long as you have 2 cups of it. And about 3 hard winter squashes. And you want to go with probably the medium-sized ones. And you could use delicata. These are huge. This one's huge. So, I mean, that could work too. But About 3 is what we're looking at. Okay, so we're going to start with 1 small yellow onion that's already been cut up, and I'm going to put that in the frying pan, my already hot frying pan. And 2 stalks of celery, already cut up. And remember, we don't use a lot of oil when we're cooking with Food for Life and with the Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine. So we're going to use a low-sodium vegetable broth today, which I've already made. You can make your own vegetable broth. You could buy containers of low-sodium vegetable broth, your choice. But what we're doing is trying to keep the vegetables from sticking to the frying pan. So just a little bit of broth is fine, just to keep it from sticking. And then I'm adding 2 cloves of already minced garlic. Okay, and we're going to let that cook for just a few minutes until the celery and the onion start to soften. Okay, here's where another option comes in. So, your choice. You could choose to use a can of cannellini beans or any favorite bean that you have. So cannellini beans are really good in this. Or you could choose to use a vegan sausage, and that's fine too. So your choice, but I really like the field roast smoked apple sage. I've already used 2 of these out of here, so this is just 2 in the package. There's usually 4. But the field roast smoked apple sage sausage is a really nice combination with the acorn squash. The flavor is very much fall and delicious in this recipe. So today I'm using the beans, or you could use 2 to 4 of these field roast sausages, and you're going to peel the plastic off the outside and then chop it up or crumble it and add it in this step. If you are using the sausage, add it in this step. And then you'll just cook it for a few minutes until it's about 3 or 4 minutes until the sausage starts to brown a little bit. And yes, it will brown. Even though we're not using oil, the sausage will get little brown bits. And as soon as the onions and celery are starting to soften and get cooked through. Okay, since I'm using the bean option today, that's added in another step. There's not that many steps, so it's okay. So all we're doing first is just sauteing in broth the onions, garlic, and celery. Okay, that actually looks like it's starting to get translucent. Okay, so here's the next step where everything else goes in. Okay, so we have the farro, 2 cups of already cooked farro. Dumping that in, and it still in the shape of the measuring cup. We'll dump that in. And we're putting in the apple. So we're using apple. Here's another option, apple, or you could use a hard pear. So I think, and I love Bartlett pears, I think they're great, but they're a little too soft for this recipe because they will fall apart. So if you have a hard Asian pear, that could work as well. So apples or hard Asian pears. So that is 1 whole apple. What I used was a Honeycrisp. You could also use a Granny Smith. That would be really good. The tartness is delicious in this recipe. And I'm going to add a little more broth so it doesn't stick. I have about a cup of broth already prepared. So just to use throughout the recipe to keep things from sticking. Okay, and then we're also adding the beans in this step that have already been rinsed and drained. Dump those in. And cranberries. This is a 1/2 cup of dried cranberries. You could use dried cherries too. That would be really good. And then you have an option again here with seasoning. So a very traditional way to do it, very reminiscent of fall, would be to use some sage and maybe some poultry seasoning, which, remember, poultry seasoning does not have poultry in it. Just the flavors that traditionally are used to cook poultry. So it has a lot of things like sage and marjoram. So you could use poultry seasoning, or you could change the flavor profile completely and add curry powder. So today I'm using the beans and curry powder option. So we're putting in just a half a teaspoon of a mild curry powder. If you really, really like curry powder, which I really do, you could add more than just a half teaspoon. So taste it. You always want to taste everything before you're finished anyway, just to make sure your seasonings are right. So taste it and see what you think. If you want more curry powder, go ahead and add it. All right, I'm going to add a little more of the vegetable broth to keep things from sticking. Okay, this smells so good. Okay, starting to look really nice. Okay, and then we're going to add 2 cups of already chopped greens of your choice. So what I have here is lacinato kale. You could also use spinach. You could use curly leaf kale. Collard greens would probably be really good too. So your favorite green, go ahead and throw that in. I'm going to let that cook down just a little bit. Spinach would be really nice in this too. If you want to, you could actually use frozen greens that are already chopped and ready to go. So you could throw in, if they're frozen, I'd probably do maybe a cup instead of 2 whole cups, because, you know, frozen tends to shrink down a little bit. But up to you. This is a very forgiving recipe, so you could do it any way you want to. If you want to add more greens than 2 cups, that's great too. All right, so we're just cooking it till it wilts just a little bit. It's going to make it fit easier in our little squash cups. Add a little bit more of this broth. So one of the things I like to do, I do like to make my own broth, but in a pinch, there are other broth options out there. Like I said, you can use store-bought low-sodium vegetable broth. Something else you could use is this Better Than Bouillon, and they actually have vegan options in the Better Than Bouillon. So this one is a no chicken broth flavor. So that's a really good option. And it is high in sodium if you prepare it according to the package directions. But you can cut down on the sodium by, instead of 1 cup and 1 teaspoon of broth paste, you could use 1 cup of water and a half a teaspoon of broth paste, and you've cut the sodium in half, and it still has a lot of flavor. So that's always a good option. Okay, this is looking really good, and I'm going to turn the heat off. So the greens have melted into, or softened, I guess I should say, into the filling. We'll get that all mixed up. And I'm just going to add a little bit of fresh cracked black pepper. And maybe just a pinch of iodized sea salt. See how much I'm adding. So, okay. It's a little bit of salt. You could always leave the salt out. That's fine. Okay, that looks really good, and it smells fabulous. So now that the filling is done, if you're making this for a get-together and you aren't having the get-together until tomorrow, then you could let this cool and put it in the refrigerator and store the already cooked acorn squash separately. And then right before serving it, go ahead and heat it back up by just putting the filling in the acorn squash and putting it back in the oven. If you're serving it immediately, this is where we take an acorn squash, gently flip it over so you can see how beautiful that is. It's all caramelized, and we'll take a spoon and add a scoop of it into the middle. And you can go ahead and just pack it in there into the middle of this already cooked acorn squash. There we go. There, so it's all piled high in here. And we'll do that with all 4 of them. And then on the top, we're going to sprinkle some hazelnuts or walnuts or any chopped nut of your choice. I like hazelnuts on it. Those are great. If you are allergic to tree nuts, you could use pumpkin seeds, and that would be really cool and very fall-like too. So that would be a good option. And let's see, let me get my last one filled. Let me show you how pretty this looks. There we go. Oh, look at that. Okay, so this is all 4 of them, all filled, and there is filling left because I only did 4 of them. And this will fill probably 3, maybe 4 of the acorn squash that have already been roasted. So they're very pretty. And then when they come out of the oven, you're going to put them back in the oven for maybe 10, 15 minutes and let them get really heated through. And if you're serving immediately, and then when they come back out of the oven, I like to drizzle them. Set them down. I like to drizzle them with a little bit of balsamic vinegar. So you could use a traditional flavored balsamic vinegar. In some towns, I know there are vinegar stores where you can buy specialty vinegars, and I have found another specialty vinegar that actually tastes really good on this. This is a cranberry pear white balsamic vinegar. That would be a great option, drizzled over the top. Or just plain balsamic vinegar, your choice. If you don't like vinegar, you could leave it off. That's fine. You could try hot sauce. That would be good too. So this is such a versatile recipe because you can do a lot of different options with it, like I said. So change out the grain, change out the kind of squash, even to delicata squash. Use an apple or a pear. And I'm wondering if anybody noticed that the combination we have right here is right here on my apron. So we have a vegetable, legumes, fruits, and grains. We have the acorn squash, the kale. The legumes are the cannellini beans. Fruit is apple or pear. And the grains is the farro. So you have your own little power plate bowl right here in an edible bowl. So I hope you'll give it a try. It is very festive, very fun, and it really says fall to me. Just like pumpkins, acorn squash just look like fall. So give it a try.
Yeah, thank you for watching.
Click at the top for videos that we have found to be very important.
Click at the bottom right to see one of our featured videos.
Please subscribe to our channel by clicking our icon at the center of the screen.
And turn on notifications so that you can get our videos when the fruits and vegetables featured in that video are in season and at their best.
See you next time.